In a development that has stirred diplomatic waters and reignited global debate on South Africa's foreign policy, the United States has formally expressed great concern and demanded clarity over Pretoria's stance on Iran following the high-profile trip made by South African National Defence Force Chief, General Radzoni Maphwanya. The trip, shrouded in both ceremony and controversy, has quickly become a flashpoint for U.S.-South African relations, raising questions about Pretoria's alignment in a world increasingly defined by sharp geopolitical divides. For Washington, the visit appears to signal a warming relationship between South Africa and Iran, a country long at the center of U.S. sanctions, diplomatic isolation, and security disputes in the Middle East. For Pretoria, however, the move has been defended as part of its long-standing policy of non-alignment, dialogue, and engagement with a wide range of international partners. Yet, in the corridors of both local and international power, the optics could not be ignored. South Africa's top defense official photographed and hosted in Tehran at a time when tensions between the US and Iran remain as bitter as ever. The U.S. State Department's remarks of great concern signal more than just diplomatic displeasure. They suggest impatience with Pretoria's insistence on walking a tightrope between Western partners and regimes often at odds with the United States. The context is particularly sensitive as Washington watches for signs of where Pretoria's loyalties lie on global issues, from Russia's war in Ukraine to tensions in the Middle East. South Africa's increasingly visible engagements with Iran, Russia, and China feed into a narrative that Pretoria is pivoting away from traditional Western allies, deepening suspicions in Washington about its foreign policy direction. General Maphwanya's trip to Iran was presented as a diplomatic engagement aimed at enhancing defense cooperation and bilateral ties. South African officials framed it as part of the normal practice of maintaining relations with a range of countries. Yet for critics, this framing misses the point. Iran is not just any country, it is one of Washington's fiercest adversaries, accused of destabilizing the Middle East, funding militant groups, and advancing nuclear ambitions that threaten regional stability. Against this backdrop, the symbolism of South Africa's highest-ranking defense officer meeting with Iranian officials was bound to provoke scrutiny. In Washington's eyes, it risks sending a signal of endorsement, or at least neutrality, at a time when the U.S. expects its partners to demonstrate clear opposition to Iran's activities. The timing also deepens the controversy. South Africa has been under the diplomatic microscope in recent years, accused of drifting toward a bloc of countries that openly challenge the West. Its hosting of joint naval exercises with Russia and China in 2023 drew condemnation. Its refusal to condemn Russia's invasion of Ukraine was met with criticism from the US and European Union. Now, with the Iran trip, the image of South Africa as an outlier in the Western camp has been reinforced. The Biden administration has quietly, and sometimes not so quietly, raised these issues in engagements with Pretoria, with this latest episode representing another strain in the bilateral relationship. At home, the trip has sparked heated debate. Critics argue that cozying up to Iran does little for South Africa's international standing and risks alienating key trade and investment partners in the West, particularly the United States, which remains one of South Africa's most important economic partners. Business leaders worry that such foreign policy choices could spill into economic consequences, such as reduced investor confidence or trade complications. On the other hand, defenders of the government argue that South Africa should not be bullied into a one-sided foreign policy dictated by Western interests. They insist that engagement with Iran is consistent with South Africa's tradition of non-alignment, where Pretoria has long sought to play mediator rather than participant in disputes. But the criticism from Washington also highlights a deeper issue: trust. For the US, South Africa is increasingly seen as unpredictable, a partner that cannot be relied on to align with the West in moments of crisis. For South Africa, the insistence on clarity by the US may come across as an infringement on its sovereignty and an attempt to strong-arm it into compliance. These tensions speak to the growing rift between Western expectations and Pretoria's evolving sense of agency in the global arena. Adding to the complexity is South Africa's positioning within the BRICS bloc, where Iran has expressed interest in deepening ties and joining as part of an expanded grouping. For many within the ANC, such alignment with Iran and other non-Western states is seen as part of building a multipolar world that reduces dependence on the West. It is not only about foreign policy but about redefining South Africa's place in a global order that feels increasingly polarized. Still, it is this very ambition that fuels the perception in Washington that South Africa is leaning toward adversaries. The backlash within South Africa is not limited to business or diplomatic elites. Many ordinary South Africans are questioning what tangible benefits such engagements bring. With the country facing crippling unemployment, energy crises, and rampant inequality, critics argue that the government's time and resources would be better spent securing investment, trade deals, and partnerships that deliver benefits to citizens rather than courting controversy abroad. For them, the Iran visit is yet another example of a foreign policy that seems to prioritize ideology and international posturing over domestic realities. Diplomatic insiders suggest this flashpoint could force South Africa into a difficult balancing act in the months ahead. On one hand, Pretoria does not want to be seen as caving to U.S. pressure. On the other, it cannot afford to alienate Washington too deeply given the economic stakes. Whether South Africa can continue to insist on its independent path while avoiding the perception of siding with U.S. adversaries remains to be seen. But the Maphwanya trip has shown just how thin that tightrope has become. The international spotlight is now firmly on Pretoria's next move. Will it clarify its stance in a way that reassures Washington while maintaining non-alignment? Or will it double down, asserting its sovereign right to engage with whomever it chooses, even if that comes at the expense of relations with one of its biggest partners? The stakes are high, not just for foreign policy credibility but for South Africa's broader global positioning in an era where neutrality is increasingly seen as complicity. What is clear is that this episode underscores the deepening tensions between South Africa's aspirations to chart an independent foreign policy and the expectations of its Western partners. It highlights the cost of being caught in the middle of rivalries reshaping the international order. And it raises questions about whether Pretoria is prepared to withstand the pressure that comes with walking this diplomatic tightrope. For South Africa, the choices made now will shape not only its relationship with Washington, but its identity on the world stage for years to come.